it's like you're too busy doing what you do to even answer the question, have I made it or not? Because we're just too busy doing it to even recognize that you're making it. Because making it really means nothing. It does. So to those out there that think of things in terms of making it or not making it, I wouldn't put that kind of pressure on yourself. I would just keep doing what you're doing.
Today's guest is a young professional in the world of jazz with quite a legacy, a family legacy on the bass. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations. We are chatting with Dominic Duval Jr. today. Dominic went to the Eastman School of Music where he studied with James VanDemark and Jeff Campbell. He also worked with Homer Mensch for a while, and he's in the New York area on Long Island. And his father, Dominic Duval Sr., was Cecil Taylor's bassist for a decade. One of those names that is well known throughout not only the jazz world, but the bass world in general. Just Google Dominic Duval Sr. and you'll see the 200 plus albums that he's appeared on and all the avant-garde experimentation that he did. So Dominic and I talk about what he's been up to in his own career, thoughts about his father and what he learned and the impact that his father had on the bass world, and all sorts of great life hack sort of stuff, the sort of geeky things that I think about but don't generally talk about on the podcast, like morning routines and learning when to say yes and when to say no for things. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. I had a blast chatting with Dominic. And this episode is brought to you by Upton Bass and D'Addario Strings. More on them later, but let's dive into this conversation with Dominic Duval Jr. Nice. What's early April on Long Island like? Is it are you guys getting good weather, or is it snowy? Or
I thought April Fools was on the 1st, but I still see icicles on the tree. So it's not as spring like as I would like it to be. It's cold.
I remember those days from back living in Chicago. This was the time of year that would always drive me crazy because it would be like, you know, you'd be getting close, I'd see some shoots, and then the stupid snow would come back, and I'd be digging out my car. And I was actually back in South Dakota May 1st last year, and we got 8 inches of snow. And I'm just like, oh.
Wow.
That gets a little old for me.
Yeah, it seems like the patterns of the seasons have changed a lot since I was a kid. You know, we had 4 different snowstorms last month, so just can't wait to get out of this cold spell.
Oh man. Yeah, it's kind of not funny, but I sort of watch by the sidelines here in California, just sort of watching all these things.
The instruments don't like it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Cold weather and basses, they can get kind of temperamental.
Yeah, that's been a real fun adjustment coming out to the Bay Area where it's like 50% humidity all the time and 60 degrees all the time. So, you know,
that must be good for your bass.
Yeah, and goodbye winter soundpost. You know, there's none of that business anymore.
No need for changing of the soundpost, yeah. Man. That's like a dream.
It's pretty nice. Although I'll tell you, with my jack stat, I never really. It seemed to be a really stable bass in terms of that. I never swapped out the post on that thing. It never seemed to need it. But I had an old German bass before that, and it was, you know, your typical different buzz for every week of the month, and so I was constantly having to deal with that sort of stuff. Those
jackstat basses are really nice. Colin Corner, I've played on his before. He's a good friend of mine.
How do you know Colin?
I met Colin when I was going to the Eastman School of Music. We just became friends.
Right, of course. It slipped my mind because he's principal.
When he was playing principal of the RPO and I was attending Eastman as a student, we just kind of linked up. You know, he found out I was in the jazz program and played classical music, and he used to come over late at night to my apartment and we'd play duo together, and we'd play through like some Brazilian things and some jazz things, and it was cool because, you know, Colin had come from Minnesota, I think, before that, where he was having kind of a fulfilling playing career with, you know, the Minnesota Orchestra, but he was also playing quite a bit of jazz on the side, and he wasn't really doing that in Rochester. So I guess I was kind of like the guy he gravitated toward, because I was kind of like riding the line between jazz and classical music, because I was a double major at Eastman in classical music and jazz at that time. So we just kind of linked up.
Very
That's
cool.
pretty much how it happened.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's funny because Colin's been so many places. I sort of forgot he was there for all those years in
I know.
in Rochester.
It's like Minnesota, Atlanta, you know, now he's out in Portland, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And
he's
yeah,
all over.
Well, and he's always had that interest in jazz. I remember when I've known him since he was a freshman at Indiana, I think. But I remember when he was in Minnesota, yeah, he was super passionate about all these side projects and playing jazz. And it was so much fun in Portland. I was in Portland recently subbing with the Oregon Symphony, and Colin and I got the chance to get together with Chuck Israels and just
nice.
hang out. Yeah. And then Colin...
He was telling me about that.
Yeah. Oh, it was so fun. And Colin actually sat in for Chuck for a tune on a gig, and that was just such a fun coalescing of different folks I know in areas of life.
Yeah, I think it's great that Colin moved out there and linked up with Chuck Israels, because I remember there was like a funny story about Chuck Israels when I was at Eastman. I was playing in one of the groups, and he was one of the, I guess, the visiting artists. Mm-hmm. And we played Bolivia. It's a Cedar Walton tune, and we were like doing these metric modulation stuff. You know, we thought we were cool kids playing like odd time signatures over 4. And he just like, we were kind of doing this kind of kid stuff in front of him, and he says, "Stop." And then he looks at me and points at me, and he says, "Bass player, you don't get off on your quarter note." As like, I wasn't like being the timekeeper, you know, I was like afraid and ashamed. It was hilarious. I was one of them. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget it. And I let's just say I've spent a lot of time working on my quarter note ever since that day, and trying to play time instead of not playing time.
Yeah. Oh, that is great. And being called out by Chuck Israels, I'd something like that. I would remember that as well.
I'll never. And he actually, I guess a few years later, he was looking for a bass to use for the Rochester Jazz Festival, and I guess my bass was rented out to him. So we got to connect after that. I don't think it's something that he probably doesn't remember, but it affected my life greatly.
Oh, that's great. Well, Chuck, I know
my bass that year.
Oh, did he? That is so cool. Well, Chuck listens to the podcast, so hi, Chuck.
Oh,
and
hey, Chuck.
Shout out to
How
Chuck.
you doing?
And then Danny Ziemann, who's another like in this circle of folks that we both know. And I'm assuming you met him at Eastman.
Yeah, we were like, we lived down the hall from each other, quote unquote, in the basement of the Eastman School of Music, where all the double bass practice rooms were. He was a few doors down from me. So we used to visit each other's practice rooms, and he'd show me what he was working on. I'd show him what I was working on, and it was way cool. I remember going into Danny's practice room was always the cool hang,
I had a student named Eric Steffens who plays principal bass in an orchestra in Germany now. He went to Eastman.
Yeah, I know Eric. Yeah.
Oh, did you? I was wondering if you guys overlapped or if he was before your time. You had some overlap there?
We overlapped. Yeah, we did. Because I was in the Eastman Philharmonia as a freshman. It was me and another freshman. We came in there and we were both offered the assistant and co-principal, principal and co-principal positions of the Philharmonia Orchestra as freshmen. So that's where I met Eric.
Oh, nice. Well, and Eric, like probably many people, came to Eastman through working with Jeff Campbell. He met Jeff Campbell at this Birch Creek Music Festival. It's a festival in northern Wisconsin, and came to Eastman through that, but then, of course, worked with Jeff, but then also James VanDemark, who he really loved working with. How did you...
Yeah, I studied with James and Eric. James and Jeff also.
Okay. How did Eastman come on your radar?
Eastman, it's kind of funny. It just kind of popped up through Barry Colstein, actually. Barry was talking to James about me and my dad, and he was like, well, why don't you have Dominic come up and play for me? And it just happened to be that I was going up to Allstate that year, and they pulled me out of the orchestra rehearsal so I could go play for Mr. VanDemark for the first time. And I think I was 16 years old at the time. And I went and I played for him, and he looked at me and he said, if you want to come here, you can come here.
Nice.
And then I said, okay. And then I didn't apply to any other schools, and that's the school I ended up going to. I was rejected as a jazz major at first. That's a little known fact.
Wow. So
because like Chucker Zero said, like, I wasn't really working on my quarter note. I knew how to play the bass, but I didn't come up listening to like Ray Brown or Pettiford or, Ron Carter. The first bassist I ever heard was Scott LaFaro at the age of 8.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard him on Sunday at the Village Vanguard, and I was like, wow, the bass can do that? That's what I want to do.
So that's when you picked up the bass?
When I was about 10, I started playing. My dad played that record for me. I remember I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and he said, son, I'm about to play you something. It might not be important to you now. It might not be important to you now, but maybe someday it will be. And he was right. That's for sure.
Now, did your dad encourage you to play the bass? Or, obviously a well-known bassist, I'm just curious.
He actually discouraged me.
Really?
Believe it or not. Yeah. After about a week of playing, I didn't seem to have much talent for it, and he pulled me aside and sat me down and said, son, you really don't seem to be very good at this. Maybe you should consider doing something else. That's what he said to me when I was 10 years old.
Really? Well, why did you not take that advice? Do you remember? I don't remember much from when I was 10, so I don't know if I remember.
like most children, you don't listen to your parents,
Right.
It's like you do everything of the opposite they tell you to do. So he told me not to do it. So of course, naturally, I continued to do it, and I'm glad I never stopped.
Who'd you work with at that age? Were you taking lessons or working on your own?
I studied with my first classical teacher was Emil Batti. Did you know him?
That name is ringing a distant bell, but tell me about him.
He recently passed away, and so did my father. It just seems like everyone's kind of passing away. It's unfortunate. He taught through the Children's Orchestra Society, and he was the principal bassist of the Greenwich Symphony Orchestra, and he Samandalized me, which is what I like to call it. He rubber band my second and third finger together, and he spaced out my first and second and third and fourth, like with stretching, kind of my natural rest. That's what I always had a pretty good left hand because of him. And I also studied with Homer Mensch not long before he passed also.
While you were in high school after Eastman, when were you working with Homer?
When I was in high school, I was working with Homer Mensch.
Okay. And
he really was a mensch because he was like, if you want to study with me, just get yourself here. I won't charge you for the lessons. So he was a very, very giving giving teacher, and I wish I was in more of a headspace at the time to process what he was trying to tell me then. And that's kind of the way I look at my younger years of playing, is like, wow, I really wish I would have had the brain I have now then, because I would have gotten a lot more out of it now, you know?
Yeah. I think that we all think that as we get older. I shudder when I think back to like 21, 22-year-old Jason and all the things I did not absorb right in front of me.
It's like I remember it now, which is good, because I think of everything everyone's ever said to me or told me, but when they told me it, whether or not I was ready, I got the information, like it or not, you know?
Hey, Jason, this is Barry Green calling, the bass player from Cincinnati and then California, and now I'm back in Cincinnati, and we're having a lovely snowstorm right now on the 24th of March. Are you kidding me? Springtime. Anyway, I'm just checking in to talk about how cool not just Diodario strings are, but the entire organization. I mean, like Lyris and all of the bosses there, they are so supportive of the arts, of music, what they do for music, and music programs around the world with the foundation, and supporting the artists and the many clinics that I have done as well for them and through them and with their support. They are the most amazing human beings. So when I play my Diodario strings, I not only share music sounds, but I'm spreading the Diodario message of benevolence and good fortune and dedication to music. I've always enjoyed the Diodario strings because they're so universally cool. They work for orchestra playing, they work for solo playing. They have so many models that are possible, from a hybrid string for an orchestra player or a solo bass player. You get a little more edge with the hybrid. The mediums are great for most instruments, but I find that sometimes the instrument, not the strings, but the instrument needs a little help in the certain registers, and therefore it's like a prescription. It's kind of like a person. I mean, like if you're fat or if you're skinny, you're going to wear clothes that make you look better. And so if your bass has a nice high register and needs some help on the bottom, then you want something that helps enhance the bottom. So find the clothes. The cool thing about Diodario is that they have a lot of clothes in their closet. And so we're going to take all those Diodario strings out of the closet and fit it on our unique basses and get them all to look really, really cool. All right, Jason, I hope this is helpful, and I know Diodario is helpful to the world. Bye.
So yeah, and these are probably impossible to answer questions, but I've talked to several people who've worked with Homer, and at some point I'm going to do a Remembering Homer Mensch episode, with those different stories.
That'd be great.
Yeah, do you have any? Well, I'd love to have you in that episode too. Any stories, takeaways, what he was like as a teacher, favorite moments, anything like that you can recall?
I just remember him letting me play on one of his fine Italian instruments, and I forget. I'm not sure if it was a Guarneri or not. I can't remember, but it was. I just have vague recollections of visiting him in his home. Like the couches had the plastic on it, like your grandparents would in Florida in a retirement community. He was pretty old at that point. But that's about all I remember is just playing. Sometimes he'd have me play on his student bass, and sometimes he'd let me play the real deal. And man, I love those fine Italian instruments. I'm a real bass nerd when it comes to that kind of stuff.
When
I wish I. I wish I could remember who the maker was.
Yeah, that's like I wish that when my students come over, I wish I could hand them some beautiful, work of art to play on. They not to be, sadly, but what about going back to Eastman for a moment? So you're starting out a classical major then, working with James VanDemark freshman year.
I got in as a classical major.
Okay. And another, James has been on the podcast a couple times, 40 plus years at the Eastman School of Music. Memories, takeaways, what he was like as a teacher?
He was a really great teacher. He really helped me get my left hand together. And we worked through some great repertoire like the Kusevitsky and the Bottesini. And I think I even played the Proto Sonata on my final classical jury, as well as the Fauré Elegy. You know that one?
Sure, yeah.
So, he really got me very far, but he could even tell that I was looking to be a jazz musician. And he said this to me, and I'll always remember this. He said, "You know what, Dominic, I think if you want to be a jazz bassist, you'll get to where you're going a lot quicker than if you stay on this path." And I remember those words to this day, and I thank him for that.
So you audition again then for the jazz program, move into Jeff Campbell's studio?
Well, I was kind of in both for a while, but it was just way too much to handle. I was in so many different groups and taking on so many credits as a double major. It was ridiculous. My workload was like 30 plus credits a semester. So, and it was funny. I always had this problem when I would play in the practice room, because one time I was aspiring to be like the next Gary Karr or Edgar Meyer. Those were my dreams initially. And I could get a good sound like those guys, and I would sound good in the practice room. But then when I would get in front of a small group of people, I always had such severe performance anxiety. But I've played in front of thousands and even maybe more than that, playing jazz, and always feel at home on stage, no anxiety whatsoever.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. I'm thinking about revisiting some of my classical repertoire and giving like a kind of hybrid recital of some things that I had worked on when I was a classical player, and maybe also some jazz stuff and maybe improvised stuff. I'd like to do a performance like that sometime soon.
Yeah, that'd be great to do. And it's always fun to revisit those old paths and reconnect with some of that repertoire, some of those different styles. What about working with, just kind of going through some of these teachers that you worked with, Jeff Campbell, who's somebody I've been meaning to connect with for the podcast. It'll happen one of these days, but
you definitely should. Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. And I've talked with Danny Ziemann about Jeff, and certainly Jeff and I know each other. But what was Jeff like as a teacher? What'd you take away from Jeff? What'd you learn from Jeff?
Jeff was somebody who always just wanted you to sound like you. He wasn't ever telling you what notes to play or how to play, and I just remember him for that. I was kind of like being a little bit rebellious in my later years at Eastman, and I was actually I took on the role of being a father to some kids with one of my ex-girlfriends, whatever, big mistakes in the early 20s kind of thing. And I wish I would have had my head a lot more tuned into music at the time, because Jeff was really trying to help me, but I really I'm really thankful that he just allowed me and my colleagues to just embrace who you were as a player and what you sounded like, and that was one of the greatest takeaways from him.
You also weren't you in Utah for a stint post Eastman, I'm assuming?
Yes, I was. I was out there at Snow College trying to finish my degree, and I was also kind of like their adjunct bass faculty at the time I was there.
Where is that in Utah? I know Salt Lake City, of course, but
it's in Ephraim, Utah.
Where is that?
About like 2 hours south of Salt Lake, I guess.
Oh wow! Okay, so out in it's probably some spectacular landscape out there.
Oh yeah, we were in the valley, the Sanpete Valley, I think it was called.
So you moved out there.
Too much. Yeah, I don't have too much to say about that.
Okay.
Honestly.
Okay. But so did you end up finishing a degree there, or did you finish at Eastman, or did you study for a while?
I still don't have it to this day. I still don't have the paper. So hopefully at some point I could find the right situation where I can finish, because sadly I'm only about 10 to 12 credits away from having a degree. So perhaps I'll contact Eastman and see if they're still willing to let me come back and finish there.
Where did you go? So just sort of going through this progression and working with Jeff and James at Eastman, and then moving on to Utah.
Then I worked on cruise ships. I was in cruise ships after Eastman.
Okay.
I worked on cruise ships for a couple of years. And then that's when the Utah thing came up, because it was a connection through someone who I met in passing in Italy. A friend from my ship had a friend from another ship, and we met up, and he played trumpet. His name was Tom Young. And he's like, hey man, why don't you come out to Ephraim? They really need a jazz bassist. And so maybe you could finish your degree here. But sadly, they weren't able to do what they said they could do, so that's unfortunate. That's what I meant by I don't really want to talk about that, you know.
Sure.
That's when Ephraim kind of came into the picture for a short amount of time, and then they told me, oh well, if you want to finish, we'd be glad to have you finish here, but it'll take another 2 years or something like that, and we're really sorry, and I just couldn't really afford to. 2 years more of my time, and my father was getting ill, so I just decided to move back to New York, and that's where I've been ever since.
Those 2 years on the cruise ships. So I'm always fascinated by cruise ship gigs, and I think the only person I've spoken to on the podcast about that is David White, who's active in New York City, the theater scene. And I live here in San Francisco, right where the cruise ships dock. And I actually, every day I'm walking by looking at these things, and I'm thinking about what's it like doing that kind of work? I know it can be kind of a wild scene. What's it like working as a bass player on a cruise ship?
Well, I worked on 5 different ships. My first contract was 6 months and 3 weeks, and that was a wild one. That was like the let loose kind of contract. I was drinking a lot. Amongst other things, and I was playing a lot of Motown and show kind of tunes, and we had production shows that were kind of like our playbill shows, where we played through excerpts of Earth, Wind and Fire and etc. Etta James, and then we also had different entertainers that would come on and off the ship every week or two, and we'd have to play through their book, and the charts were such a mess, man. Oh, you wouldn't believe it. There was so much editing and writing in my brain before my hands played the notes, and this was on electric bass most of the time. I wasn't even playing upright for most of it. I was just playing electric bass, and the electric bass was a very foreign thing to me at the time, and even now it still feels pretty foreign in my hands. But the lifestyle, you're living in a very small cabin with another person, stranger from a different country usually, and the last contract I ever did, I spent 1 month on a ship where I was actually working in a jazz quartet, which you would think would be better. but the pianist in that group actually played left-hand bass. So we got along, but I don't think he knew that. But he was walking bass lines over my bass lines. You know what I mean?
Right. That can be a musically bizarre experience.
Yeah, just imagine what that would look like on the bass line of a piano left hand, like what note I'm playing and what note he's playing. You're seeing a lot of those, like, you know, major second, minor second, like, you know, he's picking out different notes than I am. So I'm like, do you need a bass player? I don't, why am I here? You know?
Yeah. Wow. How do you audition for that gig, or is it placed, like, I don't know that world at all.
I actually, so I forget who set me up with it. If I thought back far enough, I could probably remember, but I remembered I just had to do a Skype audition, and I actually rolled out of bed. I slept through my alarm. And then all of a sudden I'm getting this phone call. I'm like, oh man, it's time for the audition. So I literally went downstairs in my pajamas, plugged in the bass and said, okay, what do you want to hear? And I was hoping it was like nothing too crazy, because my experience on electric bass at that time was very minimal. I'm talking like so minimal that when I got to the ship and met the ship in Civitavecchia, Italy, it was very frantic. I remember we were going through all these different trainings and stuff as a crew member has to do, and I was having to learn these shows. But my first night there, I had to play a show on the electric bass, and I just can't believe I even got through, because I was like looking at my left hand and looking at the page at the same time. And the music director at the time came up to me and said, oh, if you're looking for a career in cruise ships, you got a long one ahead of you. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but, you know, I used it. It served my purposes. But would I do it again? Probably not. But I think for a young professional out of college, it's a good developmental gig to kind of, you know, they say you got to pay your dues. It's one of those good paying your dues kind of gig.
Yeah, I'll bet. Some good life experiences and stories.
Yeah. For upright players who don't play electric, I would advise you start playing electric immediately, because it is helpful to be able to do both. So I'll say that.
It's one of those things that I just sort of forget that anybody might not play electric bass if they play upright bass. Like, that's just so many people. My experience, you know, is so typical. Like, I played violin, and then I picked up electric bass and moved over to upright bass. You know, that's such a common progression. I sort of forget that it's not a familiar animal for everybody who plays upright.
Oh no, it's totally a different beast. I still need hundreds of thousands of hours to put into it, but it's always like I wish I'd played piano as a child, because my hands are too bassified, as I like to call it, to even try to play left hand piano. You know, it doesn't move on the piano correctly. But that's definitely, I'm speaking to any bass player out there. Definitely, if you don't play electric bass already, at least get a cheap one and start playing it, because it will be helpful in getting work, but it'll also, your electric playing will influence your upright playing, and your upright playing will influence your electric playing.
For sure. I don't play a lot of electric these days, but I've actually been teaching some in some schools in San Francisco and working with electric players. I'm working with them on electric, but also on upright. And yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I start to think about upright a little bit differently after a long day on electric.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually in the process of acquiring my first adult electric bass, so stay tuned for that.
So
I haven't owned an instrument that I don't want to put down yet. I got that department covered in the upright area with the Prescott, but In terms of electric basses, I need a great instrument, so I'm waiting to get it.
Nice. Well, let me know what you get when you get it. It's always fun to bring a new instrument into your life, whether it's electric or upright.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. So
this episode is brought to you by Upton Bass, and have you checked out this new travel bass from Upton? Oh my goodness, what a cool looking design. What a great sounding bass. It's just totally remarkable. And the way that they're launching this product, it's just so perfectly Upton. It's bold, it's innovative. You got to check out these videos of Gary Upton unfolding, I don't even know how you describe it, putting together, I guess, this travel bass. It takes almost no time. It is in a Samsonite piece of luggage. I kid you not. It is just a suitcase. It is literally a suitcase bass, but it comes together and it's a real bass. It's a nice sounding bass. It's so cool. Just another example of the way in which Upton is innovating and blazing new trails for the bass community. So thank you for what you do, Upton, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. So, there are so many people I wish I would have been able to chat with for the podcast, but they left this world too soon, like your dad certainly being one of them. And just reading through, I think there was, Dom Manassi. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, Dom Manassi.
Dom Manassi. So Dom Manassi wrote, I believe, for No Trouble, or I can't remember what site, but it was remembering Dominic Duval.
All about jazz, I think.
All about jazz. Okay, so that's a great piece, and I'll link to it because it's really and he talks about you and your dad, and it's just like a really wonderful tribute. And since I can't interview your dad, it's great to be able to talk to you. It's like, I'm one step removed. So maybe we can just...
Yeah, I'm the second source. Yeah, second-hand source. Yeah.
Exactly. So, it's such a wide topic. I don't even know where to start. But, just tell me about your dad's career. He's a name I've known, obviously, not nearly as well as you. What should somebody know about your dad's journey through the music world?
They should know that he was Cecil Taylor's bassist for a decade. And I think that says a lot about a player and an artist. So definitely check him out in that capacity. But also, he was just an amazing artist in terms of exploring the sounds and different sounds and sonic tones that come out of the instrument. He'd use pedals and loopers and reverb and all different effects. And there's a record called Nightbird Inventions. That was a solo double bass release. And I'm actually preparing to release a solo double bass record, so look out for that one too. I already recorded it and I didn't even realize it, kind of like that. But my dad, if you just go into Google and type in his name, Dominic Duval, you'll just start there. It's a never-ending rabbit hole of information and records. He was kind of like a guy who just appeared out of nowhere because he stopped playing the bass for about 10 years during the 70s, or I guess, and started playing again around 1980. And it wasn't even until his 40s, in the early 90s, that he started really playing prolifically. And he got linked up with this producer Bob Roosh from Cadence and CIMP up in upstate New York, in Redwood. And he's on over 200 records, and he still has records coming out, and he's deceased. That says a lot about somebody, Mm-hmm. I'm still having to coordinate different stuff for albums projects he had to be released. And it always amazes me how he's left this planet, but he still has more records coming out.
Wow. Over 200. That's remarkable.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I don't think any of us will ever reach that amount the way the music industry works these days. I like to call him the Ron Carter of the avant-garde jazz world.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. And then big hello to Ron Carter if he ever hears this.
Why did he stop? He stopped playing for 10 years, you said?
Yeah, my father, he just had a family, and he went out and got a union job as a window washer, and he was up on the side of skyscrapers in Manhattan washing windows. Wow. He was like a union guy for a while. And then out of nowhere, he just upped and started playing again. I guess because he couldn't deny himself the bass any longer, I suppose.
Well, didn't Sonny Rollins have a similar? Didn't Sonny Rollins quit music and go work some sort of kind of regular Joe job? Am I remembering that right?
I'm not too sure on that one, but I wouldn't be surprised. There were a lot of jazz musicians who drove cabs or worked for the post office or something, that just had regular day jobs just like everyone else until they quote unquote made it. But who knows what that even means, because most artists, even to the day they die, like you look at them and you're like, wow, Sonny Rollins, Cecil Taylor, Dominic Duval, they must have been millionaires or something. But my father didn't die with $1 million in a bank account. I'll tell you that. So,
well, it's one of those things, like that concept of making it, I think, is something that people, I don't feel like I've made it. And most people I know, that if I look externally, I don't think I think that's something that's like a proves to be a false concept for most people that I know.
Yeah, there's like you never make it. That's why you keep playing, because the end is the end. That's when you can't play physically anymore, or you're deceased, That's the end. That's when you've really made it.
Well, it's the concept of the endless game. There's a marketer I really admire named Seth Godin, and he talks about different he talks about a lot of things, but one concept is the endless game. The game, the journey is the game. There is no end. It's something we do every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like I liked your recent thing about Colin and Chuck. Where you reminded us to do our stretches and everything. It's totally true. Bass is such a physical instrument. I mean, when you get to a certain level, you really have to take that seriously. And I stretch every day. I'm sure you do. And I have my own routines, and so do you. I remember Rodney Whitaker told me the best place to always do the tendon stretches is in the shower. Mm-hmm. And then also another friend of mine, Maury Loudon, actually showed me a stretch he does flat-handed on a table. I don't know. There's so many different things. I only really try to play the bass when I have to, because I have some torn ligaments in my left hand, which from a car accident that I refuse to have fixed, because I could still play at least to the capacity that I'm happy with. So I'm not letting any doctor go in there and chance him messing up anything in my left hand any further than it already is. You know what I mean?
Oh, I completely know what you mean. And it brings to mind a recent scare my wife and I had, just driving.
I'm thankful you guys are okay, by the way.
Oh yeah, thanks. And I haven't said anything about it on the podcast. Not that I'm hiding it. It just hasn't come up. But I'll tell the super quick version of the story. My wife and I were driving in Monterey on vacation, and driver fell asleep at the wheel, came careening into our lane, hit head-on collision with our car, totaled the car. My wife broke her wrist in 2 places, and it's one of those things you're just kind of this topic we're talking about, things you can't control, right? Like, talk about something you can't control. Yeah. We were about to go drive down the coast and look at the sea lions, and then 5 minutes later, there's an ambulance there, and my wife's being helped by this, woman on the side of the road, and it's just like a complete, just a bunch of craziness. And so now she's got, but it really brought home that idea. It's like, oh, broken wrist, I mean, if you just say that doesn't sound that bad, but she's got this huge scar on her arm. It sounds like she'll recover fully, but she can't move her fingers very well right now. She's in physical therapy, like right as we speak. So it's scary. Those things you can't control.
It's real. All these things can happen, and you really have to be careful about try to be as careful as you can, and how you live. Like if anything could be avoided, then try to avoid it. That's the simplest way I can put it.
Yeah, like we can't control someone coming in and colliding with our car, or us slipping off the road on the ice.
The things that are in your control to some degree, you can make decisions that will avoid injury or prospect of injury.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
I'm glad she's doing better, by the way.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, no, she's doing better. It's just one of those things. Things happen in life like that, and what can't, my brain always goes back to what can I control? Well, I can't control that, but I can wake up and make my bed and do my stretches like we were talking about, or go to the gym, or eat some food, and just for me, routines like that are a great comfort, and that probably speaks to my personality, but I
do the same thing, so don't worry. It sounds like my day from the start of this morning, actually.
Well, it's been interesting. Moving, this is sort of on similar topics we were chatting about, moving from a very structured career, which I had back in Illinois when I was teaching school. My schedule was very externally mandated, and I had to get to work and do this and this. And now I've moved back into this, I guess, creative, artsy sort of career where I really have my time to schedule as I see fit. And, there are benefits and drawbacks to both. Like having that external... Yeah. Have you thought about that before too?
I only make decisions that I want to make and play in situations I want to play in at this point. You have to really become selective in what you do, because your time and your effort and your body and your focus are all very important. So you have to do everything with intent, and it gets to a point where you have to actively make decisions that kind of guide where your career as a musician and just as a human being are going,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I heard a great Tim Ferriss is somebody I listen to. I love his podcast, and I can't remember who he was speaking. Oh, it was the founder of CD Baby, whose name is I'm blanking. Derek Sivers. And so Derek Sivers has a technique for evaluating whether or not to do a project. He's like, it's either a hell yes or a no. And so what he does is he ranks a project 1 to 10, but you can't use 7. Because so many projects in life land in like a 7. So it's like, I'm pretty excited. So you either have to be 1 through 6 or 8 through 10.
Yeah, so hell yes is more of the side I'm erring on nowadays, and it sounds like you are too.
Yeah, but it's interesting though. Like, how do you know? How do you know it's a hell yes? That's like do you feel it in your gut? Do you sit down and make a pro and con list? How do you choose whether or not to take a gig or get into a new project?
Honestly, I have very few gigs these days, which is a good thing, because it allows me a lot of time to do other things that are more of the hell yes kind of things. And I won't name any specific names, but I have some big things coming up with some people I've dreamed of always playing with. So hopefully we document that. But I just got tired of taking the 1 through 6, 1 through 7 kind of stuff, and just said, you want to know what? I just can't do this anymore. If you don't want to do restaurant gigs, don't do restaurant gigs. If you don't want to do wedding gigs, then don't do wedding gigs. Onward and onward. You know what I mean? If you don't want to do it, then don't do it. It's that simple.
Right.
And it might hurt it might hurt your bank account, but we're all human. So if it hurts your bank account, go out and get a day job. That's what you do. That's just what you have to do. You have to make it a living somehow. And if your music is not providing for you, then go and do whatever you have to do so that you can still continue to make music.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny. It's amazing to me. I constantly marvel at this in my own life, how clearing out space in your life, in your calendar, like new opportunities seem to emerge that are better than what you cleared out. Like, I can't tell you how many gigs I've lived mostly in the classical world, so I haven't done a lot of restaurant gigs. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I've done like
there's like a Seinfeld thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
I know, but it's true, you know. And like some people that love like weddings and restaurants, and that's all good. And if that works into your life, awesome. For me, it's been amazing quitting like a gig, like a community orchestra gig or something, and I'm convinced that I'm never going to make that money back. But then the next year I look and I like made twice as that money back because I was able to say yes to things that I didn't even know were out there.
No, exactly.
Right.
When you keep accepting the restaurant gigs and the wedding gigs, you're just setting yourself up in this endless cycle of restaurant and wedding gigs. When you actively start saying no, that is when the other stuff starts to happen. If you have the ability to provide at the caliber, you must be prepared for the opportunity when it comes. And I believe I'm prepared enough to play with whomever I'm going to play with at this point. I just keep working on it. You know, it never ends. I haven't made it, but I just never stopped. I'm still going. And I took myself out of that life, and it seems like it's starting to steer it more in a direction toward performing. And that's the kind of situations I'd like to be in more often. So, yeah, my calendar is looking a little like empty, but I'm not so concerned about it because the things that are coming up are much better than the things that I let go. Like you said.
Well, and I think there's a phase in life where you, like, especially younger people that might be listening to this, like, I certainly had a phase in my life where I said yes to everything, and that was a good thing too, because I was learning what I liked, and
I used to say yes all the time, but I'm approaching the age of 30, and both of my parents are deceased, and I don't have kids, I don't have a wife, so I believe the concept of saying no is valid at this point. Yeah,
and it's just seasons of your life. You know, at least for me, when I was 19, 20, 22, whatever, like saying yes, that was the season in my life where I really wanted to be doing that. And then even by my late 20s, I wasn't saying yes to everything because I'd started to sort of sculpt. But like we've been talking about, in the spirit of never having made it, like I'm still continuing to sort of like tweak things and figure out what I like and what I don't like. And every day
it's like you're too busy doing what you do to even answer the question, have I made it or not? Because we're just too busy doing it to even recognize that you're making it. Because making it really means nothing. It does. So to those out there that think of things in terms of making it or not making it, I wouldn't put that kind of pressure on yourself. I would just keep doing what you're doing, get to a point, figure out what you want to do and what you don't want to do, start saying no a little bit, and take it from there. Then get to the hell yes bracket. I think that's a mild breakdown of what we're speaking about. You know.
Well, give us. I have my one traditional question I like to ask people, which is advice for your, let's say, 18-year-old self. If you were 18 when you went to Eastman, were you 18 when you went to Eastman to start?
Yes.
Okay, so what would you tell that, 12 years down the road? Obviously, you've got a lot more career ahead of you, but what would you tell 18-year-old Dominic about bass, life, career, whatever?
I would say I should have listened more to my teachers, and I should have stayed a lot more focused at that time when I had the resources, because now I don't have the same resources available to me that I had then, and I wish I did. That's what I have to say to my 18-year-old self.
I love it. Well, let's in the spirit of George Costanza, we'll leave on a high note and wrap it up.
Leave on a high note.
Dominic, thanks for chatting. Great to have you on the show. I'm sure we'll have you back again soon for some of these projects that we were chatting about. And thank you so much for listening, folks. If you want to check out different jazz-oriented episodes, and obviously Dominic does much more than just play jazz bass, and we talked about much more than that. But if you want to hear from jazz artists, go to contrabassconversations.com/jazz, and that will take you to our archive of conversations with people like Ron Carter, Christian McBride, Gary Peacock, Chuck Israels. The list goes on and on. And I would love to hear from you. If you've never reached out, send me a message, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Let me know a little bit about yourself, what you like to hear on the show, any guest ideas or topic ideas. That would be super appreciated. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, contrabassconversations.com/subscribe will give you information how to do that. And there are lots of different ways that you can get the podcast delivered to you. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. If you're looking for a new double bass, check out what Mitch has available at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you each and every week from San Francisco, California, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.